Welcome to the Holistic Life Studios. This is a place where my law office, Inch Law, is. I'm Charlie Inch, trauma philosopher, and I have with me an incredible guest today. His name is Philip White. He's a master fatherhood trainer, and he's worked extensively with the community as far as that process goes. He and I have a little bit of history together. We'll see what we get into. We're just trying to bring awareness to the things that we're not talking about. So what are we not talking about is one of the podcasts we're working on. Also, In Recovery of Villainy is another one. And then we also want to do stories of resilience and healing. Yeah. And so like we want to look at the ugliness, we want to look at the difficulties, and also look at the resilience and the hope. And so without further ado, my friend, Philip White.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
Man, it's been, thank you for stepping into this. This podcast was a dream of mine. It started in March of 2020, and I started doing I do criminal defense, and domestic relation and stuff, and you and I have some history from that, and so I just wanted to there's a lot of people just don't know what's going on. They don't know what the struggles are, and if they haven't been personally through the struggle, even if their family member has been through the struggle, they don't understand, right? Yeah. And so I just wanted to. I'm just desperate to get different people in different walks of life together and start talking about this. So let's just let you mind if we just rap for a little bit.
Absolutely.
And it'll be cut up into some shorts. There'll be some longs, and we're going to be put on YouTube, and so everyone will get a chance to kind of criticize us if that's okay for you.
That's fine. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Tell me about yourself. You tell everyone a little bit. What are you doing? What have you been doing with the past couple of years?
Oh, it's been a journey. It's been a blessing. Professionally, I'm a social worker. I went to school for sociology, and after that went directly into social work. About 37 years of social work, mostly in the area of child protective services. And in that position, I did mostly prevention, and I was blessed in about 2000 to be invited to take a trip to Virginia Beach, Virginia, to meet one Brian Hawkins, who had the initial fatherhood program in the whole state of Virginia. The director at that time at my agency, the Henrico Social Services, invited me and a couple other guys to go and meet Bryant and his crew there that was doing fatherhood groups. And it was called FIT, F-I-T, Fathers in Training. And it was from that engagement with Bryant that we started to go down weekly to participate in that work they were doing there with dads. And it was interesting for me because I've always been comfortable in the midst of men, boys and men. Started out as a young boy in the city of Norfolk, Virginia, playing sports, primarily football.
You were a football player?
I was a football player.
What were you? Were you a wide receiver?
Initially, I started out as a quarterback.
Everyone says they started as a quarterback.
I started out as a quarterback, and I think that's where I learned my initial leadership stuff. Yeah. Because a quarterback got to be a leader. Yeah. And I took it seriously, and I would do these things. I would be in school. And I would always carry this notebook around with me, and I would see birds flying or ducks or something, and I could create a football play just by watching how they were moving through the sky. And my teammates would always be interested to see what I was coming up with as far as a play, So I think that leadership stuff started early, and then from playing school ball, community ball to school ball. Then went on to college, and by the time I got to college, I got converted to defensive back. And what I learned through sports was some of the key ingredients that I think all men need to have, and that's discipline. Discipline is a requirement that a lot of men struggle with.
So let's start right there. That sounds like a great idea. I've got lots of theories on toxic masculinity and kind of like men's emotional health. Yeah. Can you talk to me about some things? What are the things? Because I 100% agree with you with the discipline aspect. What do you think is missing for people that have difficulty delving into discipline? What are the things and I believe that they're healable.
Yeah.
However, I believe a lot of it is a lot of it is trauma, neurology, and some other stuff. So, what are your thoughts about that?
I approach it from an athletic position. I think for boys socially, our parents mean well. I think parents mean well when they're raising boys, but we give boys at such an early age too much freedom. It's like we protect our daughters. We always make sure our daughters are near the parents, particularly their mothers. They keep them close. But we give boys a lot of personal freedoms that can cause a great deal of harm to them at various stages of their lives. And my goal is to try to encourage parents to keep their boys as protective as they do their girls, and to allow boys to learn how to be free with their emotional welfare. You know, because we kind of put boys in a box. Yeah. This brother named Tony Porter and Ted Bunge out of New York, they have this group called Man in the Box, and they use that term to try to symbolize to people how we put boys in a box at such an early age, particularly with their emotional welfare.
Oh man, we do. The kind of let's talk about the phrases, if you will. Like as early as they can start to listen. Is suck it up, don't cry. Yeah. I mean, children that are just that are 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that part of what you're talking about? It kind of leads to this potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with fathers can be a caretaker, a caregiver, taking care of their children, but they can be so different in their emotional effect with their daughters versus their sons. They stop hugging and kissing on their sons probably by 10, and it's just that emotional welfare that boys go through is pretty rough.
Do you believe, or do you have any empirical insight to this, that a little bit of homophobia is part of some of that aspect as well, as far as the nurturing and like the physical attachment and the physical touch of boys? And I don't mean I'm certainly not suggesting that we sexually, objectify them. However, I guess that there's almost like male to male connection, familiarity, even like putting your arm around your buddy. I know that even in my friendships, I've got buddies that are from, one was Saudi, one was Pakistani, and they would come over and and it would make me uncomfortable, quite frankly. And this is just probably the other year, and just totally just hang their arm on and say, hey man, hey buddy, how you doing? For American cultures, there's almost that immediate, is someone going to call me because like the locker room talk back, I was raised in the 80s and 90s. Do you have any insight in this? I mean, is it attached at all?
It's historically has always been an issue with how men show. This is a word we don't use. How we show affection to each other. Right. It's something out. It's again, you don't want to be seen soft or gay or something. So you got to kind of keep your distance, even though you can really, really have a genuine fondness for a friend. Yep. You just limited as to how you express it. Yep. How you show it. And that's what creates this limitation of being authentic with guys, and it's sad, and it's really, really sad that we have constantly followed that model of raising boys, and it's not resulting in any positive outcomes. That's the problem.
Well, it stymies emotional growth. Yeah, it stymies emotional growth, and I think even more than anything, I think what it does is it harms our relationship then with the women that we love.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And you and I, you invited me to that Fatherhood thing that VCU was putting on, which was great, by the way. Thank you so much for getting me there. I think it was last Friday. Right. And you may recall, I felt the need to share with people because I deal with men's rage so much, whether I'm representing the women that they're hurting. The biggest thing right now that's really painful is I've got women in my life that I care about that are friends of mine. That have shared with me about the men in their life literally breaking their bones and putting them, strangling them, and women are trying to get away, and it's surprising the kind of households that this is happening in. And now I don't want to, and without getting, there's three sides to every story, and I don't want to suggest that anyone deserves anything. It's a very complex case, and so I don't want to just paint with a broad brush. However, if the information that I'm being given is true, that broken bones and that worried about whether or not he's going to come home drunk and high on coke and just kind of just do, you know, these are the things that we as men are not addressing. How do we start? What do you think would be the things? We're in some difficult spots right now.
Yeah.
You know, and what women are doing, and it's reasonable because of how dangerous it can get, is bringing out protective orders against men, fleeing the state, going to other states, establishing residency there before they handle the custody and visitation. And so, like, it's traumatic for everybody, and that's now becoming some of the things we're dealing with. And so, where do we start? Do you have any ideas?
The formal anchor, one of the anchors on CNN many years ago, Chris Cuomo, he made this statement.
Oh, Chris Cuomo?
He made this statement, and it stuck with me. And they were talking about domestic violence, and he said this. He said that domestic violence will never, ever be eradicated from America until men are on the front lines with women addressing it.
Right.
If we don't take that position, and it starts personal with how we can have a dear friend that we know is being abusive to his children and to his wife. And how he talked to him, how he looks at him. He's just into that power and control. And we like this guy. And we can see this stuff. And most men will not have the ability to say, hey, man, what's going on with you? What's going on?
Well, the thing about this is hurt people, right? People aren't willing to apply that to then the abusive man. He doesn't get that. And so how do we then? Because I see it too. And, you know. And so when I'm having conversations with these men, coming around to that, because I think the big thing is that while those men are coming off big and scary and bear-like, it's really coming from a place of fear.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about that. Like what's your experience with how to start having these conversations, or without putting them into defensive, right? Because depending on how you approach it, that could be the end of the relationship, and then it causes even more of a problem.
And I think that's the problem that causes men not to take that step to address it with their friend, because they don't want to catch that heat coming back at them. And we got to be able to stand flat-footed and say, hey, man, I care about you. Now, I do more. It's more than care about you. I love you. You know, you were the best man in my wedding. I'm the godfather of your children. And what I'm seeing, I'm not happy with. Well, you just get out of my house. Get out of my house. Because he knows that you done touched a button in him that he don't know himself how to fix. And we got to be strong enough and anticipate that and say, no, I'm not going nowhere.
Well, how do we do that from a place of grace and love? That doesn't turn into the accusatory aggressor. That we so often, because I think the problem with men is we don't know how to regulate our emotions. And so therefore, when we feel that we need to put our foot down or protect a boundary, the only way to do it is with fight, flight, or freeze. You know, and that's one thing I don't like about our concept of boundaries. If the boundary is violated, then you have to abandon or exile. You know, and so I think really this comes back down to what's the relationship between men and the familiar, like all these male relationships. How do we start addressing the abandonment and exile? I've got friends right now that exactly what you talked about. It might not have been me being abusive. It was something else that they were critical of me about. And they don't ask me what I'm dealing with or what I'm trying to solve by doing this. It becomes just you're doing this, you should be doing better. And if you can't figure it out, and I've got huge personally abandonment and exile wounds, which are, you know, with something else. However, then what really then I get put in fear, and already in there I'm getting ready to be abandoned and exiled like always. And then boom, then they stop talking. I get ghosted, and no one tells me exactly what it was. We're unclear to the person. Say this is exactly what it is, and what they try to do then is impart intent and thought. You know what you did. It was your intent, and if it wasn't your intent, then screw you for not knowing it, because now you're not smart enough to figure that. And so it becomes this like really unhealthy, toxic way to then. When in the beginning, what we're trying to do is just make things better. Where do we start there? How do we start address? How do we? And we can't solve everything today. What can we talk about that?
Well, what we're doing today, this podcast right here, and podcasts like this are going on all over the country now. And most, unless a dude has lived in a cave all his life, he has heard bits and pieces about this type of conversation. And the more men that becomes first take acknowledgement that we got some things we can fix. If we can get past our own limitations and having sessions like this to at least just talk about it. And most men understands what we're talking about, and they know people that need help. Right. And this has been a crusade for probably the past 30 years with these kind of conversations. We talk about this big term there, masculine, the masculinity issues that men are struggling with, and all kinds of things that have been around for a while now. And we're going to have to continue it and continue to give men, men talk about doing huddles now, all kinds of cool terms that were attached. The meeting that we were at last Friday, same thing, you see. So the more we can put men in circles like that, and we really, and this is one of my hopes, and before I rest of my life, is to be able to get middle schools and high schools starting to address these kind of relational stuff with boys. If we can catch them at middle school and begin to stop having these kind of discussions, we can save a lot of boys before they get to high school. How do we address
the definition of what it means to be a man?
That's a great question.
Because I think that's tied up with this, right? Yeah. I mean, because we think about, and I remember this even in grade school for myself. I can't remember where it was, but someone said write down the things. And it must have been 8th grade. And I remember the teacher said write down the things that you think make someone manly. And I recall like people wrote down like powerful, angry, all those words.
Yeah.
And I just remember like at that early age, and then like I remember the teacher saying, does anyone think that kind of person is actually someone that they'd want to be around or want to be? Or is that how you want the people that you love to think about yourself? It was obviously impactful enough that I remember it right now. I just don't remember when it was.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing we're running into as well, is because we have this, I call it cognitive emotional dissonance. Like our cognitive thought process of what it is does not line up with our emotional state of actually desiring or wanting that. Right. And so then, I've also had this kind of thought process of where did gentleman come from? Where did the word gentleman come from? Or at least the concept of he's a gentle man. And this kind of like new, like is it possible to really start identifying what's this other avatar that we can start kind of putting men, in front of? And this is all tied to kind of fear in the household, So
It's a complex challenge. It's very complex in regard to how do we help men to be free with their emotional welfare, with their emotional growth, without feeling like somehow if they step out the box, then they're going to be a target.
Abandoned, exiled, or even That's you bring up a great point. When I've been doing some work with the reentry population coming from prison into the civilian world, and also with rehabilitation, which I'm sure you're also involved with some of those. Have you noticed the needling and the ridiculing of each other? I noticed one thing. I came in, I was waiting for the class to start at a rehab center, and they were coming in, and they were just that little, you're just like really putting each other down, and just for a joke, and and now that I know what I know about the neurology and kind of just seeing them, and you can almost just see their physiology changing before your eyes, and then, and just kind of like the discomfort, and then you could tell like this has been going on for a while. And so it's those behaviors, especially when it's like the discomforts. How do we handle discomfort? It's so interesting.
Well, I found I learned years ago that whenever you create a group setting for men to be in to just talk about various issues, the first thing I would always do, because some of the men, if not all of them, may not know me personally. They may know of me, but they don't know me. So I would always make it a habit that the first thing I would do would write my name, get a big old magic marker or something, write my name, and put my phone number. Always do that. This is me. This is who I am. Because I know that there are going to be some men that come in a group setting, going to sit there the entire hour and a half or 2 hours and don't say nothing. And it's not my job to try to pull stuff out of them because I anticipate that. But I guarantee you, Charlie, what's going to happen before the week is out, I'm going to get a call. From one of those guys that didn't say anything in group because what we started with talking about fear.
Yeah.
They may be dealing with stuff, but they're looking around the room and they don't know anybody in there but the person who introduced himself. And I would always make it a habit to have men tell me, how did you get here? What brought you here? Are you a self-referral or you were ordered by the court, social worker? How did you get here? And it's interesting how men will unpack their reasons as to how they got here. But there's a benefit in the men that are comfortable with talking about their stuff when they start sharing their stuff. The benefit to the group as a whole, the other guys are listening to.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So there's a learning process. I always tell people that wants to do this type of work as a facilitator, you are a facilitator. You're not the group leader.
Nope.
That group leader is going to show up in the midst of the group.
You're merely just holding space.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Men don't know how to have a safe conversation because of the way we've been taught now to meet. And it's almost like it's like social jujitsu. Jujitsu is there's a buddy of mine, Dale Hart, who's a retired professional MMA fighter. I went to visit him this August up in Maine, and he took me to grapple. I mean, can I give you some advice? Just you may or may not ever need to use it, but if you have the opportunity to grapple with a professional MMA fighter, can I tell you
no.
Just don't do that.
Don't do that.
He taught me, and no one ever put it. I tried to do jiu-jitsu about 20 years ago, and he said, Charlie, there's just 5 stages: survival, counter, sweep, control, and submit. And so, now that I've learned that in those stages, those are the kind of things that I just have a photographic memory for some reason. Now apply it to kind of now see that if you see that showing up in a conversation, survival, counter, sweep, control, and submit. And it's just it's so interesting to watch that happen even verbally amongst a group of men. And that's kind of what I talk about, that needling, right? And these are big problems. I was very impressed with the fact that we were having that conversation on Wednesday, though. This is the first time I will tell you, I have been yearning to figure out how to start men's groups. I've got clients that are girl dads or boy, and I've heard from them. They're like, Charlie, how do I learn how to be a girl dad? They're like I didn't even have a father, so I don't know what a father does, and I never had sisters, and they're coming from these broken homes, and they behind closed doors, like, Charlie, man, how do I learn how to be a girl dad? How do I learn how to be a boy dad? And it's really moving. Have you heard of the phrase, the opposite of love is indifference? What's your feeling on that?
I think it's rooted. I refer to it as rooted in that generational pattern of training that people have or didn't get. It's like when we talk about the father wound,
right?
And then sometimes a man will get married, have children, and people complain about he's too quiet, he's too isolated, all of that. And they don't ever realize that he may not have had his own father in his life.
Right.
And I would always try to encourage men that if your father is still alive, you should engage him. Not confront him, but to engage him. Right. Because what you may find out, Dad, that he too did not have a dad in his life.
That happened Friday at my table.
Yeah. And that's generational stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
And until we can, Carol Adams, who used to do a lot of women's groups and all kinds of community services here in the city of Richmond, she was with the city's police department, Carol Adams. And she had Carol Adams Foundation for many years. And she would help women to escape from domestic violence, where she would help them relocate,
right,
change their identity,
right,
all of that kind of stuff, just disappear.
Which is needed, like scary enough as it is. It's in some of these situations. I mean, these women are getting killed.
Yes.
You know,
right. And she told me about some training that all police officers were getting. This was back in the day. Hopefully they still are. And it's called compassionate confrontation. You can confront a situation, but you do it in compassion.
Right.
You know, and that's what I try to embrace when I know I'm dealing with a man that's got some issues as far as his relationships with his children and with his spouse. But I do it from compassion, and I do it from patience.
Right.
And no matter how angry he may get, because I done pushed him to a point where he knows what I'm saying is true, I'm going to counter that with some words of encouragement.
Right.
But you still keep coming to group. Why you keep coming?
Right.
Because you're hearing some things that you know you need.
Right.
And you're doing good.
Right.
You know, because we gotta be able to, this term of truths, trust and truth. I will always look to help men understand if we can trust each other, then we can share our truths.
That trust is the thing.
Yeah.
You know, are you familiar with Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? Mm-hmm. So he's got, you know, the results that we could achieve is at the top of the pyramid. It kind of looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, what are the results that we could achieve?
Right.
If you held yourself accountable to what I thought you committed to, right? Those are the top 3, right? And I think there's every single profession and every single human service worker, I think, could say that they could agree with that's a problem, right? And so then the 2 below that Patrick in his book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team gets to is then fear of conflict and lack of trust. And so then that's there. I've added to the bottom of that neurological safety, like some somatic work to bring to the person's attention. And then there's some tools. And then I kind of build this into like using that conflict area. I try to call it like, how do we teach healthy conflict? Because that seems to be the place that we're at, is that if either we agree and we can be friends, or if we have any disagreement, now it's freaking war. You're a bad person. Your very identity is tied to the fact that you can't agree to me. I am absolutely correct. And there's like nowhere in the middle can we even stop to recognize, can we agree? And then we tend to try to skewer each other with the words. Like, well, no, that's what you said, so that must be what you meant. As opposed to giving people the opportunity to kind of like get on firm footing and say, well, maybe the way you brought it to my attention, maybe I don't necessarily agree that.
Right.
May I switch it to this way? Like this is closer to how I feel. You know. What other? This is such a good conversation. You know, like who's talking? I'm not running into these conversations. You know, people aren't able to have this conversation.
Right.
What else on this particular subject are you seeing after 30 years? Like what? There's no way that I know more about this than you do. So I just want to get some of your stuff out here. Where are we going? What seems to be successful?
Yeah. Well, I think what's successful is that, and this is countrywide, that these conversations are happening.
Right.
You know, what we anticipated Friday, and this is going on all over the country now. The National Fatherhood Initiative, which is a national organization out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, they've been around for many, many years. And they put out a lot of research material, a lot of training packages. You met Bill and Nate Friday. They do My Brother's Keepers program here.
Are you familiar with the Fatherhood Foundation of Virginia?
Fatherhood, yeah, that's Chris.
Chris Beach.
Chris Beach. Chris, man, I know Chris for many years. He's doing some great stuff, what he's doing here. So I've always tried to, people who want to do this work, they can't be solo. They have to connect themselves with other folks who are doing similar work, because there's unity, there's strength if we could all be in the same camp, be together, support each other. That's why I show up when I get an invite to go to stuff. I go because I'm going to meet somebody I don't know that I need to know, and I think that's how we can sustain.
That's how it works.
And build that strength. That's community wide, you see, and I think people who remain isolated they can't sustain that because they won't connect with other folks that have likeness of what they're trying to do for the community as a whole. But when we can unite together, we can support each other together. You can still have your program doing your thing, but we still should all be in a similar objective of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, like it's more strength together than just as individuals.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the beautiful things that we can do. Just like you gave me this invitation to come, I knew that there would be some things we would talk about that I've been down before, that I've heard before, that it's so interesting when you talk about just this whole socialization process of boys and men. It kind of stays in that same area because we all need to know how we can just change some of the things that we allow our boys to start experiencing at such an early age. One of the biggest problems we have in America today, and I am hoping that I've been in these conversations with Dan. I call him Dan, the new mayor for the city. We go way back. We go way back when he was practicing medical work at the health department years ago. Then he became the commissioner of social services. So he knew all the stuff that I was doing. That myself and a couple other fellas a couple years ago started to focus on this group that gets totally neglected, and that is teenage fathers. Nobody has found the foundational tools they need to have to work with teenage fathers, but they're out here. I just learned I got a relative that's working in Norfolk doing social work, and he was with one of his clients, and she brought up the fact that her son has a child, and the child is 2 years old. Her son is 12. And the mother of the child is in high school. So my CPS stuff started ringing in my head, right? He was 10, 10 and a half when this child was born.
Yeah.
So technically, I said, ooh, I hope no Commonwealth attorney or
anything hears about that.
Anybody hear about that? I said, that's rape. Could be rape. Now, he's not going to, like most boys that started early into that kind of venture of sexuality with older girls or older women, he's not going to see himself as a victim. You see? So,
nope. Can
it be prosecuted? I don't know.
Well,
should it be prosecuted?
Probably. Well, now you get into, the mens rea. You also give, like, children at that age, do they really have the ability to give consent? Yeah. There's actually a statute on point that talks that if both sides are under the age of 18, is there more than 5 years separation between them? So there's, there's specific statutes on hand. And even if we decide to prosecute or not prosecute, it doesn't fix the problem of the fact that we now have a child that's got a father that's 10 years older than it is.
And here's, and Charlie, this is what I use. I use that. I talk to men a lot about how do we prevent you guys from becoming particularly teenage boys, how do we prevent you from becoming a Rolling Stone? The Temptations wrote the song, My Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Yeah. And it talked about how, when we talk about teenage dads, they being a teenager, you're in your what we call your hungry years. You want everything. Yeah. You want more girls. You want sex. You eat. Everything you want more of.
Right.
And if you're not careful as a young man, if you're not careful about your sexuality, you can end up being a dad by the time you're 35 or 40 with 6, 7, 8 kids.
Yeah.
With 3 or 4 different women.
Yep.
That constitutes a Rolling Stone.
Yeah. And they're typically, and I don't, obviously just painting with a broad brush, the ones that the individuals I know like that, once again, usually there's trauma involved even before it starts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There's so much about this that's just difficult to figure out what the answer is. When you talk about the teenage dads, it almost seems like early and unplanned fatherhood. You know, because I'm not sure if the young man that you're talking about age. I mean, I can't imagine having a child at 10 and a half, right?
Yeah.
I feel like they have a lot of similar problems as that of even like early 20-year-old men that went to the club, hooked up, and weren't careful about what they were doing, you know, and now it shows up. You know, it just seems like there's so much similarity there with the lack of the planning aspect.
Yeah.
And then it hits you out of nowhere. And then what does that, and then often when you don't even have a relationship with the mother, except for something that's not, so best word to put it, it's not, doesn't have some stability.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Philip, good to have you back.
Yes.
Everyone, welcome back to What Are We Not Talking About? In Recovery of Villainy and stories for, stories of resilience and healing. Can we talk about maybe a little bit of your family? Would that be okay? And you and I met each other through an interesting way. I'll let you tell the story about how we met.
Yeah, we did. I have a relative. That's my son, my oldest. I have a daughter and a son, and my son had a legal issue here in the Chesterfield court, and my connections with a lot of attorneys that I've worked with over the years and through social services in the courts, I reached out to her. Well, let me back up a little bit. He was initially appointed an attorney, and over the course of that relationship, we realized that that particular attorney wasn't the best choice for him. So, and this is critical for people to hear what I'm about to say here, because courts, for the average American, can be a very, very stressful place to be. The rules and the procedures, the language, all of that to the everyday person is totally outside of their world. My particular relative was fortunate that he had me who knew how to navigate in the system. So once we decided that he needed to seek a new attorney, I told him we need to file a miscellaneous motion. Now, that may sound strange to a lot of people who don't know how to navigate in the system, but he did have me. So he did. He's an excellent writer. So he went to the court, filed his miscellaneous motion. I was there with him. He wrote that thing out, and the clerk took it, and she read it, and I could just see her digesting all of what he had wrote there. And she looked up at him and said, "Sir, do you need any other help?" So by the time we got before the judge that was going to hear his case, I had sought some help from some other attorneys I knew, and they referred me to Charles. So that's how we began our initial relationship from there. So, and John, you may not remember this, but when the other attorney was dismissed from the case, the judge, when she first laid eyes on my son, she said, "Oh, okay, you are Mr. White." Because I guess she had read his miscellaneous motion. And I knew, this boy, he writes very well, that she was probably impressed with what he was able to say. That's probably not done by the average citizen on a day-to-day basis when you talk about navigating through the legal system.
You're probably correct about that. And additionally, even if it is, it's usually probably not as written as well, or a lot of other errant pieces of information put in that may be more attacking as opposed to helpful.
Right.
Probably.
Right. So that's how we got together.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that for my legal practice, it is most of the time it's friends, families, and loved ones that find me. I've been telling a lot of people that I want to be the last lawyer you need for these problems. I don't want you to have any other lawyer for these problems. And I think your son, actually, you said he's graduated with from the master's program, and
he will be graduating this May
right.
from the master's program at there in Norfolk.
And he's doing, is it psychology he's doing?
He's doing social work.
Social work, yeah. So just a tremendous success story, you know, and it's just what I've noticed with people that struggle with drugs or with anything else that has to do with, you know, I don't like to call it addiction. I like to call it avoidance. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's like, I'll tell you what, one of these days, video games are going to be considered to be something that's pretty terrible for an addiction. You know, one of these things, like, you know, like anything that's giving us that dopamine drip, and like that we can then also lose sense of time and not be present. The number of marriages and father situations that's dying because the father is like addicted to video games or seems to be avoiding video games. That's a whole other conversation. However, with your particular situation, there was some avoidance and some, you know, there were some addiction issues, as I recall. And the big issue is getting the family on board with recognizing, maybe not with your family, a lot of families, getting them to realize where their interpersonal relationship and communication and any usage of blame, shame, and judgment to try to coerce the loved one into conforming their behavior to that which the family believes is appropriate or less harmful, right? And really, those things end up being terrible because they've used money and other things almost as they've used money and other things as a way to they've used money and other things as a way to they've used money and other things as a way to it's the bag's right behind you there, John, in there, in the room behind you. Okay. And then we'll finish up here probably in a few minutes and come out. Yeah. But they use money and other things to try to almost, I don't want to say buy off the loved one, but it's almost like giving a person who has broken legs shoes, right? And then being surprised that they're not using the shoes correctly. Well, I gave them all these shoes. Why aren't they walking? They should be able to walk 100 miles or run a marathon, you know? And so we get stuck in a situation of providing the money or other things, and the person doesn't have the tools to even use them effectively. You know, I've heard families ridicule the loved one that has a drug problem or other avoidant problem, and be like, "Well, we gave him $200,000 a year jobs. He could have been doing anything he wanted, and he only did it for 6 months. And then you know what? He left that job. It's just like when a person doesn't even have the capacity to regulate their emotional state, and then and now you've got this job that you know that your loved one gave you, and if you screw this up, now you're really out. You know, the level of pressure that is when they don't even have regular coping mechanisms for everyday life. You know, so talk to me about how that was for your family, because clearly you guys know what's going on. You're not a broken family that doesn't know anything about addiction. What's in your mind? What's the challenge? It doesn't matter how good of a parent you are, how educated you are about addiction, how good of a fatherhood, you know, father in training. What are the challenges that even someone that's a father in training? What are the challenges that you know? Because this is every family in America is dealing with something like this to a certain extent.
And you're right. And I think for us, because me as his father and his mother, we have always been a team. We've always been, when it comes to raising him and our daughter. And we had some godchildren, and we all these two families have always been very close. And when that situation confronted us, you know, we went through all of the denial stages. We went through the anger. We went through the sense of disbelief. But then we had to center ourselves around support. And to keep that as the center of our focus for him, just support. No ridiculing, no complaining. That's what we can do to get you the help you need. Because we knew
that's a huge difference.
Right.
That's huge.
But we knew we were looking at someone that is very, very talented in a lot of things, you know, and not for him to get so off track with this world he has stepped into. You see, and to be patient with that process.
Right.
You see. And be encouraging. And so
there was a change. Go ahead, please continue that.
And this is what I'm telling you here. This is so critical. And I've always tried to impress this on men when they show up for court. And I called it And he was a perfect example. And I said, well, we got to get you court ready.
Yeah.
Got to get your court ready. And
Yep.
that means in your personal appearance,
Yep.
how you conduct yourself when
Yep.
you're in court, how you understand the process. And a lot of men in particular, when they walk in these courts with no sense of self-control, coming there looking like they
the shaking of the head, and they think the judge isn't looking at it.
Yeah.
Just a week ago, I had a judge tell me to tell my client that maybe he didn't want to let his face show up his contempt for her rulings, and to let him know ahead of time that she didn't appreciate that. He didn't know that he was doing it.
No.
And so what you're talking about is, it's not commonsensical to people that are going through it, because we do it all the time with the people that we love, the people that we're in relationship with, our parents, and they call us out on it, and we overlook it and don't even listen. Please.
So
continue.
and that's one of those campaigns that I want people to begin. I talk to men a lot about being court ready, and we've had in the course of the work we were doing, I was able to get men to understand when you go to court, you need to be dressed. I'm not saying you need to wear a 3-piece suit and all, but you need to be clean. You need to be dressed. You need to be professional in your conduct. You need to be patient with the process, all of that.
Yeah.
And when I would go to court, particularly on those custody, domestic issues that was so much friction and just drama wrapped around them. And when I would walk in court, child, the first thing I would do is I would say, where's the mother?
Right.
She doesn't know me. She may have heard about me, but she doesn't know me.
Right.
And I would make a beeline to that mom. And I would introduce myself to her. And I said, you have any questions for me?
Right.
You know anything about what I'm doing as far as the father, this group he's in. And I would develop that openness with her to say, I'm not here to advocate for him. I'm here to advocate for your family.
Yeah.
For your children.
Yeah.
'Cause the children need both of you guys.
Right.
You understand? So, and I would try to, in my training with guys that would be working with dads, because sometimes when people heard the term fatherhood group, you think it's just all about the father.
Right.
And it's not. It's not.
A lot of fathers lose sight of the importance of the mother and what it. I don't know how many times on film or anything that it's going to be talked about, but the Old Testament story of Solomon with the two mothers. I use it with my fathers a lot because the wrong lesson learned from that is that the biological parent cares about the kid. When you got mom and dad, they're both biological.
Right.
They're both biological, and they both are now willing to carve up the kid and the kid's time for the expectation that I'm the biological father. That's my kid, so I deserved at the time. And now the kid's going to be put into this parallel parenting situation where now the kid's they're going to have to be a person with dad and a person with mom.
Yeah.
You can't talk about the other in the other's presence.
Yeah.
How does that ruin? And now the child is able to now use that to their advantage to be able to get each parent, and they play the parents off each other, and then really where that shows up is now once they get into the high schools and they have the ability to start experimenting sexually, experimenting with drugs, and there's a deep wound because they don't have the ability to be neurologically safe. They've always got to be on edge. Man, it's just so, and you're right about the fact that when people talk about fatherhood, that it's at the expense of the mother is a lot of times where it comes from.
No, it's not. And it's almost like you're taking me to a place that is very important for people to understand. There's such a large percentage of children growing up in homes where it may just be one parent. There may be people that having children who don't go into marriages. That's all taking place. And I caution men, if they get this thrown at them, not to overreact. If your children come home to you because you got custody, but they go and see mom on the weekend or over a holiday, and when they come back home, Dad, they say to you, guess what, Dad? Guess what? We just met Mom's friend. And Dad, guess what? Guess what, Dad? We decided we got two dads.
Yeah.
And when you talking about some heat coming back at me, what you talking about, Mr. White? My kids ain't got no. I say, what? Listen to what your kids saying, man. What your kids say? They say, Dad, Guess what? Guess what? We just met Billy. He's really, really nice. And he's got a son and a daughter too. And we play together. Yeah. And we decided we got 2 dads.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's your problems with that, man? No, hell no, Mr. No.
What do they say about what do they say about when they have a woman that they want their kid to call mom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same thing goes, right.
When in that instance where you have that conversation, have you ever taken it from the other part and say, hey, do you want to start dating again? Well, imagine you find a woman in your dreams that takes care of the kid and helps you take care of the kid and you get some extra time.
Yeah.
What would happen if that child would start calling her mom?
Right. That's
you
right.
know? Because that's the thing is like men don't see. I've got fathers that I represent right now that are talking to me about that. Like, man, behind closed doors, man, at my house, man, the kid's calling so-and-so mom.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting that it goes both ways.
It goes both ways. And
so how do you deal with your side?
I would tell men, I said, man, just calm down. Let me tell you what you got here. Your kids, because I'm speaking from my CPS area now, of the number of children that I know have suffered all kinds of child protective service stuff, right?
For most people that listen, CPS is a 4-letter word. You know that.
Right? But I'm talking about the stuff that we see or have seen, some of the harm that can happen to children physically and emotionally. If your children come home and say that to you, Dad,
right,
you should make a beeline to that brother
and meet
him, shake his hand and say, hey, man, appreciate the kind of person you are.
Right. My son loves you. He sounds like he's having a real good time.
Really do care for you, man. Thank you so much, man.
How can we collaborate with this? Because I can't do it alone.
That's right. And then what's happening there, Charlie, which a lot of men don't do, that's affirmation. These 2 brothers are sharing something that's good between themselves. They lifting each other up.
Do a little bit. Women don't do a great job of it.
Yeah.
I have seen women do what I would call a better job than men do. Not all women. I would tell you there's a couple women that you don't even come at them with that heat, right?
Right.
But there are some women that actually, I think for men, the wound though is that generally men feel so cut out of the children's lives. Our domestic courts still kind of operate from the 1950s concept. And we as men, this is another issue going back to the men. And I've got a huge issue that men want to be called the provider. I'm a provider. I provide. I'm a provider. What the fuck does that mean? What do you provide? Well, I mean, I provide. I go out and work and I do all this other stuff. And they don't and I don't want to. Not all men. I would just say if I was going to talk about the stereotype that women are complaining about, because I represent everybody. I don't care if you're the mother, the father, the wife, the husband. And the big issue that I'm seeing is just that men only know how to call themselves a provider or have an identity as being a provider. And then they get upset that that's all the court makes them whenever the relationship breaks down. And so then that's where I think men generally feel cut out of the kid's life, which is why, and I'm sure you can agree with this, which is why hearing that the child now calls someone else dad is like, it's the double wound, because it's like, well, now I can't even be dad. Now now that my son's got mom and dad in the other household, and I've already only got every other weekend and one dinner visit a week. Inch, how is that a good, Mr. White, how is that a good thing? How am I supposed to go affirmed with this brother who's taken over and now I'm even going to have less time and less of a foothold to stand on that the kid needs to have a dad, and I think they're looking at the scarcity. How do we get them to look at something other than the scarcity?
Yeah, and it's just one attack after another, because again, remember, we started this conversation by saying, particularly for a lot of fathers, with the system being what it is, and it can be kind of biased against men initially, and that's where men got to have that self-control. Look at the big picture.
Right.
Who are you trying to maintain a relationship with? Your children. How do you navigate this so you get the best outcome for your children? Because we don't want children to end up being collateral damage. You got to be careful.
Right.
Be careful if you speak in negative comments about the children's mother in front of the children.
Right.
That's still their mom.
Right.
You got to be careful there. You may be pissed off about something she said about you in court, which was a lie.
Right.
That's between you and her.
Right.
You don't want to go back sharing that kind of mess.
Yeah. You don't want to get
around the children.
Well, you don't want to get the smoke either way, right?
Right. Don't do that.
Right.
Don't do that.
Right.
And in reference to just helping men, and that's why I say, just helping men to get. I understand that court can be very, very stressful. It's almost like I say to men, why are you taking your personal issues And I understand their purpose, but why are you taking your personal issues around this relational issue stuff you got with mom to a total stranger? You know? You don't know this. You just judge. I mean, they would try to help you, but it's still a stranger. Why can't the two of y'all get together and figure this thing out yourselves? And that's when the room get totally quiet. No, well, Mr. White, I don't want to be around her. Why not? You don't have any self-control that you can sit down and have a decent conversation?
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. But that goes back to the neurological safety. Remember? Because like there's a lot of men that I'm recognizing now, and women as well, they're on the verge of fight or freeze about everything. Like there's no neurological safety there. I'm having people come in and you can see in their body that they're anxious and nervous. And you ask them, you know, what emotional state are you in?
Yeah.
And they'll sit there and say, calm.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you look nervous.
Yeah.
Oh, I am. I'm very anxious. Okay, well, but this is my calm state. I was like, well, calm ain't nervous. Nervous ain't calm. Well, this is what I'm normally. This is what I am normally. When I'm calm, it's like, but you're not calm. And so this neurological safety, because now that I think is triggering them to fight, flight, or freeze. And then we're getting a cortisol flush, and we feel like someone's taking our cub away. And now we're becoming grizzly bears. And then it's always popping up because no one's helping us de-anchor. And once again, men are allowed to show their anger, rage, and frustration, and they're not allowed to show their hurt, their fear, and like in their vulnerabilities, right? Like that seems to be the really big issue. Is just the ability for men to feel comfortable, even if it's not totally at ease, but be okay being in an uncomfortable, fearful state, and not go to the anger, rage, and frustration. And then that burns down the relationship anyway. Right.
It's one these delicate processes with the courts. I would always try to encourage the men, if their schedules allowed, if we had a brother that was going to court, and I would say, hey, any of you guys, are you free today? He's going to court. Can you go with him?
Yeah,
you know, we could get that's a beautiful thing to see.
If we can get some, and if it's a healthy relationship,
right.
You know, fathers that help other fathers kind of get into rage and get back into that corner, and then just like, man, you just got to fight, just like, you know, like some of that stuff it can be questionably healthy.
But when men in the group can look at a dad that's at that rage stage, say, hey man, I was where you, I was right there.
I can understand.
I understand what you're dealing with. I had to work through that myself. Right now, I'm seeing my kids more than I ever saw them before. And we can talk. Let's talk. You know, it's good to see guys after group standing up talking to each other outside at the car. They're just talking. And next thing you know, they're coming in together. They develop that relationship. And that, to me, is one of the best outcomes when we talk about men groups. To see how they form these relationships. You know, then you know you made a great impact on their lives. But men need men. If we're going to ever change and elevate this country to a level of some sense of less violence and a sense of transparency and just cooperation and networking, it starts with what we're trying to do now throughout the country, is have these men groups where men can share. And then once they start sharing, it becomes normal.
Normalize it. Normalize the conversation. Normalize the experience. Like that's the other thing, like the number of experiences. When I, you know, I was in 2017, I was in a dark place. I hadn't put anything into action. I was just getting angry enough that it was, that you know, it was the Vegas shooting that pulled me out of my tailspin, because I recognized that I understood the guy, at least in my mind. I don't know if I understood him, but I never talked to him. I understood how I could get to that place. And I recognized that I was on a train that eventually would have a stop there if I wasn't able to start controlling when I was starting to lose my shit, because it was getting later and later and later, and I was only, you know, shame in my life was what was used to control me. Shame, guilt, and some other things. And so when that becomes the only thing that controls, then everything that you do that then you feel the shame about, now the next time it must be greater, because now it's the action creates the level of shame. And the level of shame in action almost always seems to have to elevate in order to start to continue to control the behavior. Does that make any sense at all? And so I found myself there, and I'd get into these like real terrible mindsets, very victim focused, very disempowering. And that's when I went across the street and found a professional. And that seems to be the things I then understood and learned there are things that just are just not just generally known by the general public.
Right.
The very first thing is to get yourself out of crisis, to not base who your identity is on who you think they think you are.
Right.
You know, which is usually built off of all the times that you were made to feel less than or unworthy by the group that you're worried about being abandoned or exiled from. And now you don't even realize that becomes the sole focus of subconscious is to avoid that. But for the next 10 seconds, don't think about monkeys, right?
Yeah.
Well, what, may I ask, what can you, there's a lot of people out here that have loved ones and children that are struggling with, you know, cocaine, heroin, meth. Meth is a big one right now. You know, and so being a father that's kind of made it through that, that had to sit there and kind of watch it with you know, powerlessly, right? Can you give any words of like encouragement to families on how do you continue to go through it? Because that becomes the thing, it's become so painful.
Yeah.
You know, these parents are just saying, you know, Charlie, when I hear that my loved one's been arrested, man, it's the first good night of sleep I have had in years because I've been so worried I'm going to get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning that they're dead underneath the fucking bridge, you know, in a gutter.
Right.
So is this something that you personally can relate to?
Yeah. It's, as a parent and as a professional that's seen so much with families and parents and people in general, I think where we have to be as family members when we have a family member just going through some type of addiction is to be present. Your presence will give a certain amount of comfort in a way. You don't always have to be trying to encourage to do something or go here or just be present.
Right.
And I found it very effective to say to my relative or my son was that, hey, how you doing, man? Just have a normal talk. How you doing?
Right.
I'm okay, Dad. I'm all right. Doing all right. Okay. All right. And I would just show up, you know, we would just show up. And may not be the norm for some people, but he's always had me and his mom in his life.
Right.
You see, he's had that
consistency.
And I think if we could do anything for any relative that's struggling with any type of addiction, is for you to be that model of kindness, compassion, patience. Just be there. You don't have to try to talk his head off or her head off. Just show up. Just a simple text message. Hey, thinking about you. What's going on? See? And I think that, going back to that term I learned from Carol Adams, that compassionate confrontation. It's all done with compassion and patience. See? And then when you do have to take it up a notch, as far as dealing with the system, that's when you show your, if you have to go into the fight mode, it's a fight mode towards survival. But you want them to get the best. You don't want anybody to try to take advantage of them. So you kind of become one of their soldiers to help keep them straight. If somebody steps, if somebody stepped in their lives, in his life, that we know was part of creating the problem, we step in. So you need to leave. Well, I just come back and say, no, you need to leave. And he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then my son is sitting there on the sofa looking at him. No, you can't. Don't ever come back here. You see. So I think sometimes we have to take that position.